a girl discovered a millionaire that he had a birthmark as her mother. Immediately, this man suddenly became miserable and say sorry. Rain pounded down on New York City, turning its normally busy streets into shimmering mirrors. Grace, already drenched despite her umbrella, stood on the edge of the sidewalk, frantically trying to flag down a taxi. She glanced at her watch nervously. Running late again. This job interview felt like her biggest shot yet, and naturally, the city's erratic weather was working against her. Another cab whizzed by without stopping, and just then, she noticed a man standing a few feet away. He was sharply dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, hair slicked back, with an expression that seemed almost bored. He carried himself with the ease of someone who was used to success. As their eyes met, he gave a brief, courteous nod. Flustered, Grace quickly looked away, but before she could retreat into her own thoughts, he approached. "Need a ride?" His voice was smooth, with just a touch of warmth. "Looks like neither of us are getting a cab anytime soon." Caught off guard by his offer, Grace hesitated. Yeah. I'm headed to Midtown for a job interview. Kind of a big deal," she admitted. He gave a slight smile and motioned toward the road. "Same direction. We can share the ride. It'll save us both the trouble." Moments later, a sleek black car rolled up. This wasn't just any cab. It was a private car with a driver. The man opened the door for her and gestured for her to get in. Grace hesitated for a moment, uncertainty creeping in. But something about his composed, respectful demeanor made her feel safe. She thanked him with a nod and slipped into the back seat. As the car glided through the rain-soaked streets, Grace began to relax, the stress of the morning slowly melting away. The man sat quietly beside her, his eyes fixed on the window, lost in his own thoughts. She couldn't help but wonder who he was. His elegant suit, the private car, the quiet authority he seemed to carry. Clearly, he wasn't just another New Yorker fighting for a taxi. After a brief pause, her curiosity won out. "Thanks again for the lift," she said, glancing his way. "Without it, I would have been completely drenched and seriously late." He turned toward her, his blue eyes sharp yet not unfriendly. "Don't sweat it," he replied. "I'm William, by the way." William Griffin. The name hit her like a shockwave. It was a name she'd seen plastered across magazines, newspaper headlines, and the business sections. He was one of the richest men in the country, known for his luxury hotel and real estate empire. What were the chances that she'd end up sharing a ride with him? She tried to stay calm, but the recognition must have shown on her face, because William gave a small, knowing grin. "Yeah, that William Griffin," he said, sounding amused. Grace let out a nervous laugh. "Sorry, I just wasn't expecting to run into—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "You know me?" William waved it off, unfazed. "No need to apologize. I'm just another guy, stuck in the rain." They shared a quiet laugh, and for a moment, things felt lighter, almost like a normal chat. But there was still something about William that intrigued her. There was a certain tension, a subtle sharpness, as if he wasn't just a man who got what he wanted, but one who carried some sort of hidden weight. The car smoothly moved through the rain. Before Grace could think of what to say next, William adjusted his sleeves and she caught a glimpse of his wrist. Her eyes widened slightly. There was something unusual, a small, faded birthmark, shaped almost like a star. For a split second, her heart raced. That mark. She'd seen it before, not on him, but on her mother. Susan had the same birthmark on her wrist, a small star-shaped spot. It had been an inside joke when she was a kid, calling it the family's secret mark. Shaking off the strange coincidence, Grace forced herself back to the conversation. "So, what brings you to Midtown?" she asked, trying to sound casual. William gave her a glance, his eyes narrowing just a bit, as if considering how much to share. "Business, mostly," he said, keeping it vague. "I've got a few meetings to attend." The quiet that followed felt heavier this time, and Grace couldn't shake the sense that something deeper was happening. She didn't know exactly what, but something about William and that birthmark bothered her in a way she couldn't ignore. As the car pulled up to her stop, she thanked him again before stepping out. But the image of that birthmark stayed with her, lingering as the rain continued to pour around her. The interview had gone well, better than she'd expected actually, but as she left the building, she couldn't fully celebrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to William and that unmistakable mark on his wrist. Even though it seemed so insignificant, the way that it resembled her mother's mark was unsettling, as if there was some sort of invisible connection between them. Walking through the bustling streets of New York, she noticed the rain had finally let up, leaving a cool breeze in its wake, carrying the scent of wet concrete. Grace reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed her mom's number. After a few rings, Susan's warm voice answered. "Hey, sweetie, how did it go?" her mom asked, sounding her usual cheerful self. "The interview was great," Grace replied, trying to match the enthusiasm she should have been feeling. "I think I've got a real chance at this job." "I knew it. You've been working so hard. You deserve this." Grace smiled, but the knot in her stomach still wouldn't loosen. After a pause, she took a breath and said, "Mum, can I ask you something strange?" There was a brief hesitation on the other end. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Well, it's about your birthmark. The one on your wrist," Grace began, her voice soft. "You've always said it was a family thing, right? Has anyone else had it? Like, maybe Dad?" At the mention of her father, there was a noticeable shift in Susan's tone. "Grace, why are you asking about this now?" I met someone today," Grace continued, trying to sound calm. "He had the same exact mark, same shape, same place on the wrist. It just seemed weird." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Too long. "Mum?" Finally, Susan spoke. Her voice was soft, almost tense. "That can't be," Grace said, trying to keep her tone steady, though her pulse was quickening. "Why? I mean, birthmarks aren't exactly uncommon." Grace had expected a different reaction from her mother. Instead, Susan let out a long, weary sigh, one Grace had only heard a handful of times in her life. "It's just, no one in our family has that mark except me. It's complicated." Grace halted in her tracks, even as people hurried past her on the bustling sidewalk. "Complicated? How come? You've never mentioned it before," Grace said, her brow furrowing. "Because it doesn't matter," Susan responded quickly, her voice rising a bit. "Grace, don't get tangled up in this. Whoever you met, it's just a coincidence." "But Mom," "Grace, drop it, please." The sharpness in her mother's voice was unexpected, cutting through the usual openness Susan always had. She was the kind of mom who invited questions, who never shut down curiosity. Now, though, Grace felt like she'd slammed into a wall. "Okay, fine," Grace muttered, frustration and confusion mixing inside her. "I'll let it go." A brief silence followed. Then Susan's voice softened. "I'm sorry, sweetie. It's just, some things from the past are better left alone, that's all." Grace didn't know how to respond to that. "All right, I'll see you tonight for dinner." "Of course," Susan replied, her tone lighter now, as if trying to smooth things over. "We'll talk more then." "Okay. Bye, Mom." Grace hung up, standing still for a moment, staring at her phone. Something about her mum's reaction didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just unease she had sensed, it was fear. And that wasn't like her mum at all. As she began walking again, her mind whirled with questions. Who was William Griffin, really? Why did he have the same birthmark as her mom? And why had that detail shaken her mother so much? That evening, as Grace got ready to head to her mom's place for dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something big, something her mother had kept hidden for a long time. But just how deep did this secret run? The rest of the night blurred together. She barely noticed what she ate as she sat across from Susan, who kept the conversation light, asking about her job interview and steering clear of any mention of their earlier phone conversation. Grace played along with the conversation, but her mind was elsewhere. As she gathered her things to leave, she turned to her mum one more time. "Mum, are you sure you don't want to talk about the birthmark?" For a brief second, Susan's expression shifted, and her usual smile faded. "Not tonight, Grace." Her mother's tone was firm. "Okay," Grace whispered, giving her a quick hug before stepping out the door. As the cool night breeze brushed her face, Grace knew deep down that something wasn't right. Her mum was hiding something, and if she wanted answers, she'd have to find them on her own. William Griffin's name echoed in her mind, and Grace realized it was time to dig deeper. Whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence, and she wasn't going to let it slide. The next morning, Grace woke up with a fresh sense of determination, one she hadn't felt in a long time. The nagging feeling that something important was just out of her grasp had only gotten stronger overnight. A truth her mother had hidden, now stirred up by William. Lying in bed, she stared up at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The unsettling feeling from yesterday had grown more intense, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. Reaching for her phone, she hesitated. Should she try calling her mom again? No, that wouldn't get her anywhere. Susan had made it clear she wasn't ready to talk, but if her mom wasn't going to give her the answers she needed, maybe someone else could. Grace's thoughts turned back to William Griffin. If he had any connection to her family, he might not even be aware of it himself. But he was her only lead. She opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. She already knew the basics of his public life, but she was after something more, something personal. As expected, most of the results were about his success: luxury hotels, charitable work, million-dollar deals. It was impressive, but not what she was looking for. Grace scrolled through article after article, but there was no mention of his family background, nothing about his parents, siblings, or early life. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, already at the top of his game. Undeterred, Grace typed in, "William Griffin, family history." Grace's pulse quickened when a few results popped up. She stumbled across old news articles from small towns on the outskirts of New York City. One headline from nearly 3 decades ago caught her eye. "Griffin heir vanishes after family tragedy." Intrigued, Grace clicked on the link and began reading. The article mentioned a wealthy family, the Griffins, William's parents, who owned a large estate in upstate New York. A terrible fire had claimed William's mother when he was just a child. His father, heartbroken, withdrew from public life, and William was sent to live with distant relatives. But after that, there was no trace of him. There was nothing in the article about a birthmark or any connection to her mother, but William's life had clearly been far from ordinary. Just as Grace was about to shut her laptop, her phone buzzed. A message from her best friend Linda flashed across the screen. "Brunch tomorrow? It feels like forever since I've seen you." Grace glanced at the text, but didn't reply. With everything racing through her mind, meeting up wasn't something she could focus on right now. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, staring at the article, trying to make sense of William's complicated past. But something was missing. Something her mother had known, but never shared. Later that afternoon, Grace found herself standing in front of her mother's old storage unit. Her mom, Susan, had rented it years ago to store memories from their family's past, boxes filled with childhood photos, old letters, and other family keepsakes. Grace hadn't visited the unit in years, but if there were any clues to unravel her mum's secrets, they might lie here. She remembered her grandmother's cryptic stories about their family, particularly those about her mother's younger days. As Grace unlocked the door and lifted the metal gate, the smell of musty cardboard and dust hit her. The storage unit was crammed with boxes and crates, remnants of lives that seemed so distant now. Her heart pounded as she sifted through the faded labels, hunting for anything that might explain what her mother had hidden. After what felt like hours, Grace found a box labeled Susan College in her mother's familiar handwriting. She pulled it down, set it on the floor, and carefully opened it. Inside were countless photos, snapshots of her mother's college years. Some photos showed her enjoying parties with friends, while others captured Susan during her hiking trips and travels. But at the very bottom, Grace stumbled upon something that made her freeze in her tracks: a letter. The envelope, yellowed with age, was addressed to her mom from someone named Willie. With shaking hands, Grace opened it, unfolding the neat, almost formal handwriting inside. Susan, I wish things were different. We both made choices that can't be undone, and maybe this is how it's meant to be. I'm leaving for good, but please know that you and the child will always be on my mind, even though I can never be in your lives. Take care of her. Maybe someday you'll forgive me. Willie. Grace's heart pounded as she reread the letter, her thoughts swirling. The child? Was it talking about her? And the signature? Willie? Could it be William? She stared at the letter, trying to make sense of everything. Was William Griffin her father? Had her mum kept this secret from her all along? Her breathing quickened, and her mind raced with a flood of questions. It couldn't be just a coincidence. The birthmark, her mother's reaction, and now this letter, all pointing to the same unsettling truth. William wasn't just a wealthy man who happened to give her a ride. He was tied to her past, a past her mother had tried to keep hidden. Without hesitation, Grace grabbed the letter and rushed out of the storage unit, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She needed to find William. She needed answers. As she stepped into the cool evening air, her phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Linda. It was an unknown number. Grace paused before answering. "Hello?" she said. A familiar voice responded, calm, but with a hint of urgency. "Grace, it's William. We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat, and she struggled to speak. "How did you get my number?" she asked. "I have my ways," he replied, his tone growing more serious. "But that's not what matters. What matters is that I think we're both after the same thing." Grace held the letter tightly, hearing the tension in his voice, and for the first time, she knew at that moment, whatever her mother had been keeping hidden, William was aware of far more than he had admitted. "Meet me at the park by 7th Avenue in an hour," William had said before abruptly ending the call. Grace stood still, her phone still at her ear. Her mind was racing. There was no backing out now. Whatever lay ahead, it was bound to change everything. Her thoughts spiraled as she headed toward the park on 7th Avenue. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the city was now awash in the soft glow of streetlights, their reflections stretching across the slick pavement. She gripped the letter in her jacket pocket, the crinkling of the paper audible under the pressure of her hand. The letter had left her with more questions than answers, and William's vague phone call only added to the mounting tension. How much did he know? How long had he been aware? And why had her mother been so frightened of facing the truth? Though the park wasn't far, each step seemed to drag out endlessly. Every footfall echoed louder in her mind, each thought becoming more tangled than the last. She had no idea what William would reveal, or even what she should ask. The one certainty was that this conversation might rewrite everything she had believed about her life. As she neared the park entrance, the usual hustle of the city melted away. The park's stillness felt eerie, so different from the lively energy of New York. William stood beneath a street lamp, his figure tall and composed, but there was no denying the tension in his posture. He hadn't seen her yet, and Grace took a moment to steady herself. She needed to be ready for whatever was coming. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "William." At the sound of her voice, he turned, his face unreadable. They stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The quiet stretched out between them, thick with unsaid words. Finally, William spoke. "I didn't want to bring you into this, Grace." Her brow furrowed. "Bring me into what exactly?" she asked, her voice more confident than she felt. "You called me. You wanted to meet." William glanced down for a moment as if collecting his thoughts. "I didn't know. I didn't know you existed," he said softly. "Not until recently." Grace's heart raced. "What do you mean you didn't know I existed?" she asked, her voice now shaky. "I didn't know Susan kept you a secret," William replied. His voice was thick with regret. "All those years, I never knew." He paused, struggling to swallow. "I thought," he hesitated, gathering himself. "I thought she made a different choice." Grace's heart raced, and her hand clenched tighter around the letter. "Are you saying, you're my father?" Her voice wavered, nearly choking on the words. William held her gaze, and in that moment, the truth was undeniable. "Yes," he confessed softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm your father." Grace's world spun. She stepped back, feeling as if the ground beneath her was slipping away. This man, a stranger she'd crossed paths with in the rain, he was her father. The revelation was too bizarre, too overwhelming to grasp. "How? How could you not know?" she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "How could Mum keep something like this from you? From me?" William ran a hand through his hair, his usual calm unraveling under the weight of the moment. "We were young, Grace. It was complicated. I thought she didn't want this life, didn't want me. We had plans. But essays. Everything changed." Grace's mind raced as everything started to click into place. The way her mother had always reacted, the secrets, the tension that had always hovered over their past. It all made sense now, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. "You just left her?" Grace's voice shook, a mix of anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. "You just left us?" William's face tightened. "It wasn't like that. I didn't abandon her." He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Your mother made choices. I made choices. I thought it was over. I thought—" His words trailed off. "I was young too, Grace. And scared." Grace stared at him, disbelief and hurt swirling in her chest. "She never told me about you." "Why?" Her voice cracked, and tears began to well up in her eyes. William's expression was pained. "I don't know. Maybe she thought she was protecting you, or herself. But I swear, if I had known, if I knew about you, I wouldn't have stayed away." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the faint sound of a passing car. Grace didn't know how to respond. Her life had been completely turned upside down, and she felt like she was drowning in an overwhelming wave of emotions she couldn't even begin to comprehend. After a moment, William took a step closer, his face softening. "I know this is a lot to handle, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. But I want you to understand," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving. Not anymore. Grace turned her gaze away, her mind racing. She had spent her entire life believing in one story, and in just a single day, everything she thought she knew had changed. She felt lost, like she didn't even recognize herself anymore. William must have picked up on her inner chaos because he didn't push her to say more. "I know it's tough," he continued softly, "but you deserve to know the truth. No more secrets, no more lies." Grace exhaled shakily, finally meeting his eyes. "I don't even know where to begin," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," William said gently. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time. Together." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time since her world had come crashing down, Grace felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't expected. Hope. It was small, fragile, but enough to keep her standing. "I need time," she whispered, her voice faltering. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel right now." William nodded, his expression full of understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." With that, Grace turned and began walking away, her mind still spinning. But as she left the park, one thing became crystal clear. This was just the start. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many pieces of the puzzle that didn't make sense. And deep down, she knew the truth was bound to be even more complicated than she could have ever imagined. The days following that night in the park passed in a blur for Grace. She went through the motions of daily life, but nothing felt the same. Learning that William Griffin, a man she had barely known, was her father had completely shattered her world. She couldn't even look at her mother the same way, constantly haunted by the feeling that her entire life had been built on lies. Grace hadn't told her mother about the meeting yet. Every time she thought about confronting Susan, she froze. Her chest felt heavy. How could she even begin this conversation? How could she ask her mother why she had kept such a life-altering secret? Her thoughts were a jumbled mess of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness. And deep down, beneath it all, a sliver of hope that felt fragile. She still wasn't sure how to process her feelings about William. He was part of her now, a part of her past that she never knew about. But what did that mean for her future? By late Saturday afternoon, Grace realized she couldn't put it off any longer. Her mother had invited her over for dinner, and Grace knew it was time to confront the truth. The letter she'd found in the storage unit was still in her purse, its weight reminding her of the past they could no longer avoid. As she entered her mother's apartment, the familiar warmth made her discomfort grow. The scent of her mother's cooking filled the air, and Susan greeted her with a beaming smile, acting as if everything was fine. "Hey, honey, you're just in time. I made your favorite lasagna," Susan said, her voice light, but her eyes searching Grace's face as if sensing something was off. Grace forced a smile, her heart pounding. "Smells amazing, Mum," she replied, her voice tight. She followed Susan into the kitchen, struggling to hold herself together. They ate mostly in silence, the sound of forks scraping against plates, the only thing breaking the quiet. Every bite felt heavier than the last as the tension thickened between them. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Grace couldn't bear it anymore. She set her fork down and looked directly at her mother. "Mum, we need to talk." Susan froze, her cheerful expression fading. "What's going on, sweetie?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out the letter, sliding it across the table. She watched as Susan's face went pale the moment her eyes saw it. "What's this?" Susan's voice was barely above a whisper, but Grace could hear the fear beneath it. "I found it in the storage unit," Grace said, her tone steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I think it's time you told me the truth, Mum. About William." About everything. Susan's hands trembled as she lifted the letter, her eyes darting over the words. She didn't speak for a long time. The silence hung heavy, almost unbearable, until finally Susan put the letter down and faced Grace, her expression filled with pain. "I was hoping you'd never have to know," she said quietly, her voice thick with regret. "Know what?" Grace's voice cracked. "That William Griffin is my father? That you've lied to me my entire life?" Tears welled in Susan's eyes, and she reached out as if to console her daughter. But Grace recoiled, the pain in her chest too overwhelming to accept her mother's touch. "I didn't lie to you, Grace." Susan paused, clearly searching for the right words. "I was trying to protect you." Grace's heart tightened. "Protect me? From what, Mum? From him?" Susan wiped her eyes, her face crumpling under the weight of guilt. William wasn't always the man he is now. Back then, things were complicated. We were in love, but his family didn't approve of me. They wanted him to marry someone who could benefit their business. To them, I was a nobody. Grace felt a flicker of sympathy, but her need for answers quickly took over. "That still doesn't explain why you kept me away from him." Susan took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "By the time I found out I was pregnant, William and I were already drifting apart. His family was putting pressure on him, and I knew if I told him about you, he'd have to choose between us and his family's legacy. I didn't want to burden him with that decision. And truthfully, I was scared. Scared he wouldn't choose us." Grace's heart ached, hearing her mother's vulnerability for the first time. But the sting of being kept in the dark for so long still burned. "So you just decided for both of us?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. "You thought it was better if I never knew my father?" Tears streamed down Susan's face. "I thought I was doing what was best for you, Grace. I wanted to give you a normal life, free from the chaos of his world. His family is powerful. They would have torn us apart. I didn't want you caught in the middle of that." Grace suddenly stood, unable to contain the turmoil inside her. The chair scraped against the floor with a grating sound. "I had the right to know." Grace's voice quivered. "You took that choice from me." The air in the room was thick with tension. They stood on opposite sides of the table, the emotional distance between them feeling even greater than the physical one. "I'm sorry," Susan whispered, barely above a murmur. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought it was the right decision for both of us. Hurting you was never my intention." Grace's hands trembled as she tried to absorb the weight of Susan's confession. It felt like she was standing at the edge of an emotional cliff, teetering between anger and grief, uncertain which way she would fall. "I don't know what to do with this," Grace rasped, her voice barely holding together. "I don't even know how to feel about William. I met him, and he had no idea I even existed. How could you keep this from me?" Susan moved around the table, reaching for Grace's hand with a soft, yet urgent touch. "I know it's overwhelming. I should have told you sooner, but it's not too late. You can still get to know him, if that's what you want." Grace's eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them back, unsure of what she truly wanted. The only thing she knew for certain was that everything had changed, and there was no going back. "I need time," Grace whispered, her voice cracking. I need time to figure all this out." Susan nodded, her own tears quietly spilling as she released Grace's hand. "Take as much time as you need. I'll be here whenever you're ready to talk." Grace picked up her bag and walked to the door, her heart weighed down by the revelation. As she stepped into the cool evening air, she took a deep breath, trying to clear her thoughts. But no matter how far she got from her mother's apartment, one thing was clear: Her life had been irrevocably altered, and somehow William Griffin was at the center of it all. The next few days passed in a haze for Grace. Everywhere she went, memories from her childhood resurfaced, but now they carried a different meaning. The revelations she had just made were weighing on her mind. Every thought of William, her father, left her breathless. The man who had once been a faceless figure in a rainstorm now took up all the space in her mind. And the mother she had always leaned on suddenly felt miles away, almost like a stranger. Since their last heated exchange, Grace hadn't spoken to Susan. The words, "I need time," hung thick in the air between them. Susan had respected her request, giving her the distance she asked for, but the silence between them felt unbearable. Grace wasn't ready to confront her mother just yet, but she knew she couldn't stay stuck in this endless loop of questions and confusion. That's why, when William reached out to her again, she didn't pause. She was ready for clarity. No more vague explanations or half-hearted truths like the ones her mother had given her. William had arranged for them to meet at his office, located in a shiny skyscraper right in the middle of Manhattan. Standing outside the massive building, Grace's nerves buzzed with anticipation. The lobby was exactly what she'd imagined. Polished marble floors, sleek modern artwork on the walls, and a receptionist who seemed to recognize her as soon as Grace said her name. "Mr. Griffin is expecting you," the woman said, directing her to a private elevator. The ride up was smooth, but with every floor they ascended, Grace's heart raced a little faster. When the elevator doors slid open, William was already there, waiting. He looked as composed as ever, but there was something different this time, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "Grace," he greeted her, his voice calm but steady. "Thanks for coming." Grace just nodded, still not trusting her voice to cooperate. He led her down a quiet hallway to a spacious office, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. The room, all sharp lines and modern design, was undeniably luxurious, but there was a coldness to it, much like the man who owned it. William motioned for her to take a seat in one of the plush leather chairs, and he settled into the one across from her, his eyes searching hers, unsure of where to begin. "I know this is a lot to process," he started, his tone gentle but measured, "and I don't expect you to come to terms with it all right away. But I'm glad you're here." Grace leaned back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I'm not sure if I'm here for answers or just some kind of closure," she admitted. "But I need to understand. How could you not know? How could you not look for me?" William's jaw clenched, and he took a long, deep breath. "It's not that I didn't care, Grace. I truly didn't know. Your mum and I were young back then. My family was influential and controlling. They had my life all mapped out. And Susan, she didn't fit into their plan. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting her too." Grace's voice tightened with emotion. "Protecting her? Or just protecting yourself?" William glanced away, his face hardening as if wrestling with a painful memory. "A little of both, if I'm being honest," he admitted quietly. "I wasn't strong enough to stand up to my family back then. I made a lot of bad choices, but when Susan vanished, I just assumed she had moved on with her life. I had no idea she was pregnant. I swear." Grace wanted to believe him, but the sting of betrayal was too deep. "She told me she was afraid, that your family would tear us apart." William nodded, his expression filled with regret. "She wasn't wrong. My father, he would have done whatever it took to keep me focused on the family business. I wasn't the same person back then, Grace. I didn't know how to push back." Grace turned to the window, looking out over the city below, which seemed so distant and small from up here. And now? What are you fighting for now? William's expression softened as he leaned in closer. You. I'm fighting for you. His words hung heavy between them, and for a moment, Grace was at a loss. A part of her wanted to believe him, to imagine what it might be like to have a relationship with her father. But another part of her couldn't shake the anger that her mum had raised her alone while William lived comfortably in his wealthy life. Why now? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. William's gaze dropped, his fingers nervously drumming on the armrest. I found out about you. He admitted it was an accident. My father passed away a few months ago. As we were sorting through his belongings, I came across letters from your mother, letters she wrote to me but never sent. That's when I realized I had a daughter. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Letters. More secrets. I didn't know how to contact you, William continued, his voice full of regret. I didn't want to barge into your life out of nowhere. So when we met that day, it wasn't planned. But after seeing you, and hearing you mention the birthmark, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Grace shook her head, her thoughts racing. So this was all just a chance? William gave a faint smile. Maybe it was fate, he suggested. Grace wasn't ready to accept that yet. The idea that her life had been shaped by decisions made decades ago by people she hardly knew, it was overwhelming. She needed answers. What about your family now? Grace asked, her tone sharp. If they didn't want us back then, why would they accept me now? William's smile vanished, and his face turned serious. My father's gone. The control he had over me, over my life, it died with him. There's no one left to stop me from doing what I want now. Grace frowned. And what is it that you want, William? I want to make things right, he said, his voice firm with determination. I want to be part of your life, Grace. I've missed out on so much already, and I don't want to lose any more time. But I know this has to be your choice. I'm not here to push anything on you. I just want you to know I'm here. Grace took in his words. As a child, she had dreamed of meeting her father, imagining what he might be like. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The messiness, the confusion, the surge of emotions she couldn't quite handle. She looked at William, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she saw more than just the distant, powerful businessman. She saw a man who had made mistakes, a man who was trying to make things right. But she also saw someone who could easily hurt her again if she let him get too close. I don't know what I want, Grace confessed, her voice soft but steady. I don't know how to feel about all of this, but I'm willing to try. That's all I can promise right now. William's face softened. A glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes, more than I had dared to expect. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of their shared past hanging over them. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a step forward, and for now, that was enough. As Grace got up to leave, William walked her to the door. The tension between them seemed to ease, even if only slightly. Just before she stepped out, William gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Grace, he said softly, his voice genuine, for giving me a chance. She nodded, still uncertain about what lay ahead. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of something unexpected. Possibility. As the elevator doors shut, Grace gazed at her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her mind is still racing. She had come looking for answers, and though she didn't have all of them yet, one thing was certain. Her life was no longer tethered to the past. What happened next was in her hands, and for the first time, that thought didn't scare her. It gave her strength. In the days following her meeting with William, Grace's emotions were a whirlwind. She found herself caught between two worlds, her past with her mother, built on love but shrouded in secrets, and this new reality with William, her father, a man she barely knew but who now played a significant role in her life. She spent hours replaying their conversation in her head, dissecting every word, every look, searching for any hint of dishonesty. Despite her doubts, William's words had seemed sincere. He wasn't offering excuses or deflecting blame. He was simply a man who had missed his chance to know her and was now hoping to repair what had been broken. But it wasn't easy for Grace to let go of the resentment. Even though William wasn't entirely responsible for their estrangement, the anger she felt toward him and her mother lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling of being a pawn in a game she didn't even realize she was part of. Her mother had taken away her choice, and William hadn't fought for her. Now, it was up to Grace to piece it all together. That weekend, Grace finally decided to go back to Susan's apartment. Her mother had been calling, sending texts, asking if she was okay. But Grace hadn't replied. She struggled to find the right words, afraid that anything she said might ignite yet another argument. But Grace knew she couldn't keep avoiding her mother forever. When she finally stepped inside the house, Susan was already waiting in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with tension, heavy with all the things left unsaid. Sitting on the couch, Susan looked up, her face lined with concern, but also a hint of relief. "Grace," Susan spoke softly, standing up as if unsure whether she should reach out for a hug or just stay back. Grace tossed her keys on the table. Her stomach knotted as she met her mother's eyes. "We need to talk." Susan nodded, her face drained of color. "I know." They sat down at the kitchen table, just like they used to when Grace was a kid. But now the space between them felt enormous. Grace drew in a sharp breath, and before she could stop herself, her feelings rushed out. "I met him," Grace said bluntly. "William. I met my father." The color drained from Susan's face, and for a moment, it was like she forgot how to breathe. "You did what?" "He called me," Grace went on, her voice shaky even though she was trying to stay composed. "After I found the letter, I met with him. He told me everything about you, about why you left." Susan's hands trembled as she clasped them tightly together. "Grace, why didn't you tell me?" Grace cut her off, her voice breaking. "You've hidden this huge part of my life from me. You lied to me, Mum, my whole life." "I wasn't trying to lie," Susan said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to grow up feeling unwanted or torn between two worlds." "But I am stuck between two worlds," Grace shot back. "And now, I don't know who I am, because you didn't trust me with the truth." Tears began to fill Susan's eyes, but Grace couldn't let her mother's sadness weaken her. She had been the one left in the dark for too long, and she wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. "I'm sorry," Susan whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I was doing what was best for you. William and I faced a lot of issues, and his family had such a strong grip on everything. I didn't want you to get caught up in that chaos. I didn't want you to feel let down by someone who couldn't love you the way you should have been loved." Grace's throat tightened, holding back the tears. "But you didn't let me decide that for myself. You chose what you thought was best for me, and now I'm lost. William wants to be in my life, but I don't know if I can let him. I'm not sure I even want to." Susan wiped her eyes, clearly filled with regret. "I get why you're mad, Grace. You have every right to be. I should have been honest with you, but I was scared. Scared of losing you, scared of what it would mean for us. if William came back. Grace sat quietly, trying to make sense of her mum's words. Now that it was more apparent, Susan had been acting out of fear in an effort to protect her from their complicated family history. But that didn't make the situation easier to accept. The hurt was already there. "I don't know what to do," Grace said softly, her voice fragile. "I don't know how to move forward from this." Susan reached across the table, taking Grace's hand gently. "You don't need to figure everything out right now," she said softly. "But whatever you choose, I'm here. I just want you to know that I love you more than anything. That's why I made those decisions. Whether they were right or wrong, I did it because I love you." A lump formed in Grace's throat, her mother's words weighing heavy on her. She knew her mum had always loved her, protectively and fiercely. But that love had come at a price. And now, they were both paying for it. "I know," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you love me." They sat quietly for a few minutes, the tension between them starting to ease. The anger wasn't gone, but something had shifted. Grace could feel the first signs of forgiveness, though she knew it would take time for the feeling to fully take root. Later that night, after the conversation had left her emotionally spent, Grace found herself lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her thoughts wandered back to William. She hadn't told her mother about his offer to re-enter her life, or how he was trying hard for a second chance. The idea of it left her heart torn between hope and doubt. Could she really let him in? Could she rebuild something with a man who had been gone for so long? Just as she was about to drift off to sleep, her phone buzzed. It was a message from William. "I'm thinking about you. No rush. I just want you to know I'm here, whenever you're ready." Grace stared at the message for what felt like forever, her thumb hovering over the screen. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she set the phone aside, closing her eyes as she tried to quiet the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Even in the stillness of her room, one thought kept pushing through. She didn't know if she was ready for William to be in her life again. But for the first time, she realized she wanted to try. And that at least was a step forward. The next morning, Grace woke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of it all still hung over her. But a decision was forming in her mind, one she knew she couldn't ignore. She couldn't keep shutting William out, nor could she keep living in the shadow of the secrets that had shaped her life. After a few minutes of lying there, she picked up her phone. William's message from the night before was still there, unanswered. A quiet reminder that he was waiting, without any pressure. His words had been simple, but they lingered with her. "I'm here, whenever you're ready." She wasn't sure if she was fully ready, but she was ready enough to try. Her fingers shook slightly as she typed her reply. "I think it's time we talk. Can we meet this weekend?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself, her heart racing. Almost instantly, the 3 dots appeared, showing William was typing back. A moment later, his message came through. "Of course, I'll make time whenever you're free. Just give me the location." Grace stared at the text, realizing for the first time that the ball was in her court. For so long, she'd felt like life was something that happened to her, shaped by the decisions of others. But now, it was different. Now, she was in control. She had to decide where things would go from here, if they were to go anywhere at all. That weekend, they met at a quiet little cafe near Central Park, a place Grace had always liked. It was cozy, with big windows that offered a perfect view of the trees outside. She got there a bit early, feeling anxious, and chose a small table in the corner. As she waited, she kept reminding herself that it was just a conversation, nothing more. When William arrived, she spotted him before he noticed her. He looked as put together as always, tall and polished in his perfectly fitted suit. But something was different this time. He seemed less formal, less guarded. Maybe it was the fact they weren't in a cold, sterile office anymore. Or maybe it was the way his eyes softened when he finally saw her. His smile wasn't the usual confident one of a businessman. It was more like the nervous smile of someone trying to make amends. "Hey," William said as he sat down, his voice careful but warm. "Hey," Grace replied with a tentative smile of her own. She had so many questions swirling in her head, but for now, she just wanted to let the moment unfold naturally. They spent the first few minutes making small talk about the weather, the city, the cafe. William asked about her job and her hobbies. It felt a little strange at first, but gradually, Grace found herself relaxing into the conversation. There was still an underlying tension between them, but it wasn't the sharp kind from before. It was more like the quiet discomfort of two people trying to piece together something that had never quite fit in the first place. After a bit, Grace leaned in slightly, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "I've been thinking a lot," she said softly, staring at the table. "About you. About us." William's expression softened, and he nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I'm not sure I'm ready to just let everything go," she confessed, her voice shaky. "I'm still upset, still hurt, but I also know that avoiding you forever won't fix anything for either of us. I guess what I'm saying is, I want to try. I want to figure out who you are, and maybe who we are." William let out a long breath, relief written all over his face. "Grace, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I realize I've been absent for so long, missing out on your entire life, and there's no way I can fully make up for that. But if you'll allow me, I'm ready to do whatever it takes to be part of your life now." Grace met his gaze, and for the first time, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There was a softness in his eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. He wasn't the distant, powerful figure she had built up in her mind. He was just a man, trying to put together the pieces of his broken past. "I don't want to rush into anything," she said, her voice steady yet gentle. "I need time to figure things out, but I do want to get to know you, even if it's one small step at a time." William nodded, understanding evident in his eyes. "One step at a time," he echoed. "That's all I'm hoping for." They sat quietly for a bit, the sound of the bustling cafe surrounding them, but the air between them felt lighter, less weighed down by the history they shared. Grace felt a quiet sense of relief wash over her, like she could finally breathe for the first time in weeks. As they continued their conversation, it shifted to stories of William's past, the places he had traveled, the things he had learned, and the mistakes he had made. He opened up about his regrets, especially about not standing up to his family when he should have, but also spoke about his achievements and the steps he had taken to distance himself from his father's influence. Grace listened, fascinated by this life her father had lived, a life she had never been a part of but was now beginning to understand. There were still moments when her old frustrations resurfaced, but for now, she allowed herself to just be curious. She asked questions, and William answered them, honestly and patiently. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of his mother, a woman Grace had never seen, but whose face she could trace in her own features. "She would have adored you," William said quietly, a hint of sorrow in his voice. "She always wanted grandchildren." Grace gave a small smile, unsure of how to respond. There was so much beneath the surface of their relationship, so many emotions she hadn't yet untangled. But as she looked at the picture, she felt an unexpected sense of connection. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a space for her in this family story, even if it had taken a long time to get here. As the day went on, they left the cafe and strolled through Central Park, their conversation flowing a little easier now. Grace found herself chuckling at William's stories about his early business attempts, those awkward missteps he made when he was younger, and the hard-earned lessons that followed. By the time they reached the edge of the park, the sun was setting, casting a soft golden hue over the trees. They stood there, watching the light dim, and for the first time, Grace felt a peace she hadn't anticipated. "Thanks for today," William said quietly, turning to her. "I know this isn't easy for you, and I really appreciate you giving me a shot." Grace gave a small nod, her heart still wrestling with mixed emotions, but lighter than it had been in weeks. "I'm still trying to figure out what this all means," she confessed. "For both of us," William replied with a gentle smile, hope flickering in his eyes. "It means we get to start fresh. Maybe not as father and daughter right away, but as two people who want to know each other. We can figure it out as we go." Grace looked at him, really seeing him for the first time, not just as the man who had missed out on so much, but as someone who was making an effort to set things right. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. They stood there a little longer side by side, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The road ahead wasn't clear, and there would be hurdles along the way, but for the first time, Grace didn't feel like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff. She was taking her first steps towards something new, something that, despite everything, felt like the beginning of a chance to heal. And for now, that was enough. The next few weeks were a careful balancing act for Grace. Slowly, and with caution, she allowed William into her life, little by little. They kept things light, meeting for coffee, taking strolls through the park, and having long conversations about everything and nothing. Each talk felt like peeling back another layer, revealing more of who William was, and in turn, uncovering more of who she was now that the truth was out. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of their shared past still hung heavily between them. Grace couldn't shake the memory of those lost years, the birthdays that went unnoticed, the moments where a father's presence should have been felt. But William remained patient. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, which gave Grace the room she needed to sort through her emotions. Her relationship with Susan, however, remained fragile. Even after their talk, Grace couldn't shake the feeling of lingering bitterness. She loved her mom, but the secret Susan had kept weighed heavily on her. Every time they spoke, there was an unspoken tension between them that kept building a barrier Grace wasn't quite ready to break through yet. One evening, following another quiet dinner at her mother's apartment, Grace found herself wandering aimlessly through the streets of New York. The city was buzzing with its usual energy, people rushing by, car horns honking, and the bright lights of skyscrapers illuminating the night sky. But Grace felt disconnected from it all, lost deep in thought. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down to see a message from William. "Can we talk? I need to tell you something important." Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like William to sound so serious. Up until now, their conversations had been light, carefully skirting around the heavier, more difficult parts of their past. But now, there was a weight in his words that made her stomach knot with unease. Without thinking, she quickly replied, "Sure. Where?" William's response came almost immediately. "My office. Can you come by tomorrow afternoon?" Grace stared at the screen for a moment, her mind racing. She had been to his office once before, but this time felt different. Whatever William had to say, it wasn't something that could be brushed off during a casual coffee chat. The next day, as she made her way to William's office, her nerves were on edge. Every step she took felt heavier. Riding the elevator up to the top floor, She couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to change again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was coming, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. When she arrived, William was already waiting, just like last time. But there was a different air in the room. William walked over with a somber look and sat across from her. "There's something I've been holding back, something that's been weighing on me since we first met," he admitted. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. She had prepared herself for more hard truths, but she wasn't sure she was ready for this one. "What is it?" she asked. William let out a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "It's about my father," he began, "and why your mother left when she was pregnant." Grace's throat tightened. This was the part of her life that had never made sense, the part Susan had always glossed over with vague excuses about pressure and family. Leaning in, Grace whispered, "What do you mean?" William's face darkened, his voice lowering as regret filled his tone. "My father was a powerful man, controlling. He had plans for my future, and those plans didn't include your mother. When she told me she was pregnant, I wanted to be with her. I wanted us to be a family. But my father..." He stepped in. Grace's breath caught. "What do you mean, stepped in?" she asked, her voice shaky. "He threatened her," William said, guilt thick in his voice. "He told her that if she stayed with me, he'd ruin her. He had the power to do it too, lawyers, connections, money. More than she could ever fight against. I didn't know at the time what he was doing, but he made sure she felt like she had no choice but to leave." Grace gripped the edge of her chair as the weight of William's confession settled in. "He forced her to leave," she whispered. William nodded, his face pained. "She didn't want you to grow up in a family where you'd be a pawn, always under his control. She thought leaving was the only way to protect you. And in some ways, she did." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she tried to comprehend what William was telling her. All these years, she had resented her mother for keeping secrets and for walking away from William. But now she realized that Susan had been trapped, forced to make an impossible choice to shield her child from a man who could have destroyed their lives. "I didn't know," William continued, his voice breaking. "I had no idea until years later, long after she had left. By the time I discovered what my father had done, it was too late. She was gone, and you had been born. I didn't know how to make it right." Grace's tears flowed as the weight of his confession hit her. She had spent years holding resentment towards both of them, her mother for leaving, and William for not being there when she needed him. But now, everything was shifting once more. An overwhelming sense of loss for everything they had missed started to replace the anger she'd held onto for so long. "I'm so sorry," William murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "If I could go back and change things, I would. I would have fought harder. I would have stood up to him. But I was weak, and I didn't see the truth until it was too late." Grace wiped her tears away, her heart aching for the man sitting before her. He had been just as trapped as her mother, tangled in a web of power and control that tore their family apart before it even had a chance to come together. "I don't even know what to say," Grace whispered, her voice shaky. "I've spent my whole life trying to figure out why things happened the way they did. And now I don't know what to feel." William's eyes were filled with regret, but also hope. "I know I can't fix the past," he said softly, "but I want to make things right, Grace. I want to be there for you now. In any way, you'll let me. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want the chance to show you that I'm not my father." Grace's heart was heavy with the complexity of the situation. She wasn't ready to fully forgive, not yet, but she could see the sincerity in William's eyes, the pain he carried for the mistakes he'd made. And despite everything, part of her wanted to believe they could find a way forward. After a long pause, Grace finally spoke. "I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But I'm willing to try." William's eyes filled with gratitude, and for the first time, Grace saw a glimmer of hope between them. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with unanswered questions and unresolved feelings, but for the first time, she felt like they were both on the same side, ready to face whatever came next together. As she stood to leave, William walked her to the door, his expression lighter than when she had arrived. "Thank you, Grace," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Grace nodded, her heart still heavy, but no longer weighed down by the same anger that had once consumed her. "I think we both deserve a second chance," she said softly. And as she stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind her, Grace felt something shift within her, something small, yet powerful. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of healing. And for now, that was enough.